I tried to make it on my own. Well, you see, well, you see. 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 In every life, some rain must fall.
To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to perceive the instruction of wisdom, justice and judgment and equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and tonight I want to talk to you guys about the Elixir of Immortality, the Eucharist versus technology. And so I hope everyone is enjoying the beginning of their weekend. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Friday. And so today's stream should be a fun one. We're going to be going over a lot of different articles and videos and stuff online. It's a little bit of a relaxed stream. We're not going to be getting too academic or too heady, but it kind of continues in the vein of my previous stream regarding technologies of transcendence, right? I was talking about high culture, drugs, mysticism in the modern world. And one of the working definitions I talked about, the use of drugs for drug-induced mysticism, is it is a sort of techne, getting back to the root Greek word there, as a sort of way or manner or means whereby something is attained. Obviously, it's mystical experience. And tied to this concept of mystical experience, which I didn't dive into enough, and that's where this stream is going to continue, is the quest for immortality. Often people who claim to be enlightened, illuminated, fully realized, have actualized their sort of spiritual body, and in so doing, they are on the way towards immortality. And so we can look throughout the entirety of world religions, religious history, world traditions, and see that there's been a quest for immortality. How do exactly we live forever? And where in the methods to attain, how do we understand this? Now, obviously, we as Orthodox Christians, we believe in attaining a sort of eternality in ourselves, as long as we are good boys and girls and follow the incarnation of our God, the second person of the Holy Trinity, the Logos, as Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. And so when we partake on this process as Orthodox Christians towards theosis, the synergizing ourselves with the uncreated energies of God, so that you and I may actually be like gods by grace, what God is by nature. And this was always, according to our Orthodox faith, the point of Christianity itself, the point of the incarnation, the point of creation, an ontological distinction between that which is created and that which is uncreated. And so we look to ancient Mesopotamia. We can look over to the Epic of Gilgamesh. We can look to the immortals of China, the Taoist alchemist doing Tai Chi at the top of the misty mountains in China, where they're searching for the elixir of life, the elixir of immortality. What is that? People have speculated, well, it's the Taoist monks engaging in inebriating mushroom use. They're finding psychedelic psilocybin, different types of mushrooms. They're finding different drugs. They're finding different plants. So we see often the conversation, at least within the contemporary period, when it comes to this elixir of immortality, often is actually we'll see a sort of conversation regarding psychedelic drugs. But usually, again, historically speaking, when we look at the sort of religious pursuit for immortality, it's typically something people ingest, whether it be cannibalism, whether it be blood, whether it be different drugs potentially, whether it be the Mithraic rite mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, the initiate, the one who is being brought towards the secret of immortality, is usually something we drink. And this has typically been the process of alchemy, generally speaking. And alchemy, yes, you may think, well, isn't alchemy that really superstitious process where they wanted to change base metals into gold? Sure, that could be one angle to understand what alchemy is. Another perspective, you could see alchemy as a spiritualized form of chemistry, a spiritualized understanding of concocting and mixing, amalgamating different substances together to create new things. And in a way, the whole process of the alchemical transformation of, say, lead into gold is that your spiritual self is lead. And that as lead, how do you turn into your pristine state? Well, that's going to be symbolized by gold. And so alchemy, generally speaking, is a process of spiritualizing matter and physical elements and doing experimentations on them, potentially smoking opium, smoking hashish, looking deeply into the various ointments, bottles, various beakers of substances that you concoct, and projecting one's mind into it, projecting one's spiritual self into it to then be reflected back to understand maybe deeper mysteries of oneself. And so this, I want to connect with the contemporary alchemists of our time. And alchemy, though we may think of it as a long process, bygone era, it's something that they did back in the 16th century, the 17th century. We don't do that stuff anymore, right? We're smart, modern people. But when we look at, as I'm going to argue, towards the transhumanists. We're going to get into Ray Kurzweil. We're going to get into the various elites who are moving us towards a place where they think that they're going to attain immortality. Now, our Orthodox Eucharist is a way that you and I partake in the potential gift of immortality. And this is going to be a key distinction between our worldview as Orthodox Christians and the elites of the world, is that we understand immortality as a gift. It's a gift from God to participate in God so we can become like God. And so the Eucharist for us is about a submission process. It's about dying to this world. Again, the famous adage that we must die before we die, so that when we die, we don't die. You guys have heard this before, I guarantee it. In fact, I actually have something here on my computer. Let me pull it up real quick. I think I got one right. Okay, maybe not. I thought I had... It will. I'll get it later. I thought I had a little Orthodox thing that says when we must die before we die, so that when we die, we don't die. So for us, we have to die to this world. Part of the process of attaining quote-unquote immortality for us is actually dying to this world, that we have to go through death to actually go beyond death. When we look at many of the elites, their aversion to death, their rejection of ever dying and seeing death as an enemy, which we also do as Christians. We also do see death as an enemy. However, it was our beloved Lord and Savior Jesus Christ who defeated death by death. And we're going to see this reiterated in an article I have by Alexander Schmemann, where he talks about an Orthodox Christian understanding of death. That death isn't something to be avoided. That death is something to be embraced so that we can live forever in God. And so a difference also between us and these technological elitists who want to live forever is that we believe in the eternality of soul and body. And so you'll see there's many different schools of these technological singularists. You have the Ray Kurzweils of the world who see a full blending of man and machine so that we can attain immortality. You see the Aubrey de Greys of the world who look into gene editing. They want to change your biological self so that you can regress in aging, so that you won't get the wrinkles, right? And we see this even amongst the elites, with things like the foreskin, putting the foreskin blood on their face. May I say adrenochrome? Adrenochrome is another example in which we see, I know that's maybe too conspiratorial for some of you guys, but others who have looked into this stuff, I think are gonna understand, maybe connect the dot that I'm talking about. If you don't know what adrenochrome is, I'm not going to get into it in this stream, but just do a little research yourself. And so we believe in the eternality of soul and body as we partake in the sacred, uncreated energies of God. And so it's through God's incarnational path that you and I can actually reach eternity. And what does God's incarnational path show us is that God himself actually had to die. And in his death, he defeated death. And so through his defeating of death, we also have to pass through the doorway of death. How do we understand death? Well, us as Christians, obviously, we have an understanding based on revelation, the understanding of the fall, the understanding of sin, things that pre-exist, as Dyer always highlights in his debates at a presuppositional level. The authority of Scripture highlights a fundamental reality of nature that you're not going to be able to witness or grasp just through naturalistic means, natural philosophy, natural theology. How, by just observing nature, are you going to come to the conclusion that we were never actually supposed to be in a state of death and killing and consuming each other and consuming flesh? That this is part of the fall. And we can only be revealed through revelation. And so our quest for immortality, our elixir of life is obviously the Eucharist. And so it's through the Eucharist that we participate in the salvific work of God. And I've talked about this before in regards to liturgical theology, Eucharistic theology, that anybody who joins our Wednesday night classes with my godfather, Subdeacon Mark, you're going to hear him talk about how we are what we eat. That when we come together as a parish, when we come to worship God, the Holy Trinity on Sunday, we are the body of Christ. The physical body of Christ is still here in regards to the church. We also partake and eat the body and blood of Christ, which we call a bloodless sacrifice. Well, whoa. So you're saying as Orthodox, you eat the body and blood of Christ, and at the same time, it's a bloodless sacrifice? Yes, exactly. But does that mean that Christ isn't fully present in the Eucharist? No, he absolutely is, through a mystery of the Holy Spirit. So you're saying, so you're kind of like the Catholics in transubstantiation. No, we're not like the Catholics. We don't have a rationalistic definition of the Eucharist. It is the full presence of Christ. It is the body and blood. And at the same time, it's a symbol. It's a symbolos, a blending, a bringing together of two worlds, of the temporal reality that you and I are in, where we see it as wine and bread. And it's the bringing together of the eternal realm through the gifts of the Holy Spirit and its sanctification of these gifts as put on the altar by the priest. And so then we have the cup, we have the chalice, we have the elixir of life. We have the cup of immortality every Sunday when we go to an Orthodox liturgy. But the way in which we understand the use of this, the way in we understand the life and the ramification that we have to start living our lives in a moral way and try to follow Christ better and better and better, this is how we attain immortality. And this is very different than we'll see from the Ray Kurzweils of the world, from the elitists of the world, from the Bill Gates and the Elon Musk, who for them, it's survival of the fittest. They have the money. They are the smarter ones. They are the better hunters, if you will, in the contemporary global landscape. And therefore, we see an interesting date in 2030, 2045, that the same alchemists who are creating concoctions to live for eternity are also very sympathetic to the stabbies that are depopulating the planet. And so this whole transhumanist singularity agenda has nothing to do with morality. It has everything to do with the worship of one's will. And I argue that the use of psychedelics, and this is what I argue in my academic research, as tools or techniques or techne or technologies of transcendence, already presuppose a sort of materialistic spirituality. And in this materialistic spirituality places the presuppositions that are fundamental for the psychedelic revelation: unity, immortality, global hive mind, protecting nature. That all these things are being fulfilled not in the psychedelics, but within technological, digital, cybernetic realities through computers. And this is interestingly where then we see the rhetoric, the current rhetoric of the quest for immortality. That the quest for immortality is now tied up with a digital interface, a digital cybernetic reality, and that this is spiritual, whether these people claim to be atheists or not. Ultimately, as soon as you start talking about the defying of death, in my mind, you are talking about a sort of spiritual, metaphysical reality of whether you can, should, or do any of these things. And so I want to talk about how these are modern-day alchemists. That the alchemist of the medieval times, the alchemists post-Renaissance in Europe, the alchemist, the Taoist alchemist of the various mountains in China, that their quest for immortality is the same alchemical quest that's being put forth by the elites right now. It's the same thing. It's a materialistic approach to somehow saving yourself in this world. Where when we look at our approach to saving ourselves in this world, it's about immaterial things. It's about love and compassion and mercy and logic and reason and all these uncreated energies like truth. You can't touch these things. And it's through these things that we synergize ourselves so that we can become more and more like God, so that eventually, if he deems us worthy, we can also partake in his eternal reality. So we see the modern day alchemist pursuing immortality through materialistic means. Transhumanism, reverse aging, gene therapy, the use of blood. So what's interesting when I started to think about the whole reversing of aging and even the use of gene therapy, which somebody like Aubrey de Grey is in favor of, and you see these various AI psychonauts and various scientists, they tend to be those who believe in the potentials for immortality, that's for sure. And that if you're always reversing aging, if you're always concerned about not getting older, in a way, aren't you staying in a spiritual immaturity? That a full spiritual maturity is to almost embrace death, is to almost to look forward to getting older, looking forward to having children and being with your grandchildren and getting your gray hairs and acquiring life experience. That is not something to run away from. It's something to embrace. But that's, again, if you understand the transcendent reality behind the physical. So if you're always trying to hedge your bets and not age, in a way, it's like you're also in a sort of spiritually immature state. And so, like I said, adrenochrome, foreskin, blood from infants and children. And then the alchemical war. Why isn't it so interesting that we are in the thralls of a depopulation agenda right now? And the same people who are so in favor of the stabbies of the depopulation are also the ones that are so in favor of the technological singularity, of man-made immortality, of a survival of the fittest, that we are the elites, we have the means, we have the capabilities, and you don't deserve it because you yourself are too stupid, ignorant, and poor. And so this is the alchemical war. I mean, essentially what these stabbies are is a sort of death cult alchemy. Whether it's the people who are funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, it's an alchemical, magical, spiritual reality behind all this stuff, behind the stabbies, behind the rhetoric, behind the spells. And that these people, because of their infatuation with themselves, with their wealth, with their power, that they are totally attached to this world and they perceive themselves as becoming physical gods. This is for them the singularity. And it's funny, again, so these people who are highly anti-religious in themselves have a religious, apocalyptic, millenarian hopefulness that somehow they're going to reach this climax, this apex of synthesis between biology and machine. This is them becoming quote-unquote physical gods. This is their apotheosis, of which psychedelics often give people the perception that you are God, right? You are the universe incarnate. You are the cognitive apparatus of space and time. So therefore, you are a sort of physical God. And as a physical God, you should use your physical means to protect your divine status, because once you die, it's all over, at least in their mind. And so they are afraid to die. And you and I as Christians are called to not be afraid of anything but our judgment. And I think that's a really interesting difference, that we aren't to be afraid to die. How else would we have martyrs? How else would we have the church? How else would we spread the faith? How else would we demonstrate our worthiness for Christ? Is that we see this life as a test, in a way. We see this life as an opportunity, as a gift. And so this is the fundamental difference between our immortality being a gift from God and their immortality being a construction, an erection of their own will into space-time. So I got tons of stuff. These are the things that we're going to be getting into. To do a little housekeeping, first thing I want to say is thank you everyone who has gone over to the website and signed up. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Also, if you would like to become a website member and you'd like to support Church of the Eternal Logos in one way or another, you can do so by becoming a website member at the link that I just posted in the live chat. I have exclusive video content, of which is my recent story. It's quite a funny story, and it ends in a happy ending about the time I got arrested after my high school graduation. I got stories about my ayahuasca experiences, the time I got jumped in China. I got second halves to mini streams that I've posted here on YouTube. And if you'd like to have access to those, if you'd like to support what we're doing here, please become a website member. Guys, please smash that like if you have not. I would greatly appreciate that. Again, hope everyone's having a wonderful Friday night. Also, if anybody wants to set up a one-on-one, we got plenty of slots open for next Thursday. If you'd like to talk about theology, philosophy, world religions, goal setting, whatever it is, magic, theories of magic, you can do so by clicking the link that I just sent in the live chat, and you can sign up for a one-on-one session, whether it be 30 minutes or an hour, or we can do multiple hours if that's what you choose. And so you can have undivided attention of myself and my time, and we can dive into anything that you would like to get into. And so also, if you guys happen to want to support in a different way, you can go to the shop and become and purchase a hat, purchase a shirt, purchase some type of item. That's another way to contribute. Would really, really appreciate that as well. And guys, also, I want to say that I'm going to start posting a heck of a lot more over on Gab. I've mentioned it before that I was wanting to do that, and I never really got around to it. But with everything that's going on, I've noticed, I guess maybe I've popped up on the radar on some of the social medias. I've noticed on Instagram where I have it says 15,000 following, my engagement is radically down. So I had a lot of people tell me that they can't even see. They haven't even been able to see some of my stuff on Instagram. And I've had multiple people tell me here on YouTube that they've been unsubscribed, that they've clicked the bell, they're not getting notifications. So guys, please double check right now that you are subscribed to Church of the Eternal Logos, and please click the bell. So hopefully, if it does work, you'll get notifications. And please click the link tree. I have tons of different links. Follow me on Odyssey. Follow me on Telegram. Follow me on Gab. And so we'll try to get around the tech censorship during these very, very precarious times that we find ourselves in. So with that being said, now we can definitely get into today's stream. So I got tons of different stuff. It's gonna be a bit of an easier stream today. We're not going to be getting into too much technical stuff. So I want to start by this little guy made a video right here that I thought was worth sharing on just the Elixir of Immortality. And so he's just showing different pictures, different pieces of art throughout world history. And so we're going to play this real quick. And I got tons of other stuff that I want to share with you. And we're going to start diving into an article about immortality, about transhumanism. And then we're going to hear a sort of immortality prophet named Ray Kurzweil and hear him talk about the speculations for the immortal future. So here we go.
How can we immortalize? Yes, for centuries, humans have been looking for something called the Elixir of Immortality. Something that makes them immortal. Alchemists in different eras and cultures was looking for the formula of this elixir. But are these myths true, and is there such an elixir? So watch this video with your grandparents because they have a key.
When I started using computers, there were only about a dozen computers in all of New York City. Now we all carry multiple computers in our pockets and our belts, but computation is a lot more pervasive than these gadgets we carry around. Take this rock, for example. Doesn't look like it's doing very much, but it has trillions of atoms and molecules in here. They're all moving around, bouncing against each other at incredibly high speeds. That's computation. That's not very useful today. It's organized kind of randomly. We can't communicate with it very well, but we're going to change that. We're going to reorganize the vast amount of computation in this rock to make it useful. And it won't just be raw computation. We'll infuse it with exquisitely intelligent software, vastly greater than our intelligence today, and with all the knowledge of the human-machine civilization. This rock is going to be a trillion times more powerful than all biological human brains today. This is going to be quite a valuable rock. We call matter and energy reorganized in this way computronium. We're going to reach these limits late in this century, and at that time, we're going to turn many of the rocks and other stuff suitable for computation into computronium. And so, to keep the expansion of our intelligence going, we will then need to spread out to the rest of the universe, turning some portion of it into computronium. How fast can we do this? That depends on whether or not we can transcend or otherwise get around the speed of light as a limit. There are suggestions that there may be subtle ways of doing this. One possibility is to send intelligent nanobots through wormholes, which are basically shortcuts to apparently faraway places through other spatial dimensions beyond the three we're familiar with. Wormholes through space appear to be consistent with our understanding of physics. If it is indeed feasible to either find or build such wormholes, our intelligence will be so great that we'll be capable of engineering these shortcuts to reach other parts of the universe in brief periods of time. In that case, we could infuse the universe with our intelligence rather quickly. It would require only another century, that is by the end of the 22nd century, to saturate the universe with computronium. On the other hand, if we can't get around the speed of light, it'll take a lot longer. But in either case, expanding our intelligence throughout the universe is our ultimate destiny. Cosmologists today argue about whether the universe will die in fire or ice. Fire means a big hot crunch, basically the opposite of the Big Bang. Ice means stars flying apart, eventually dying out. Both of these views of cosmology assume that intelligence has nothing to do with it, that intelligence is just a bit of entertaining froth that dances in and out of the dumb celestial forces that rule the universe. But this perspective ignores the law of accelerating returns. As a result of the exponential expansion of our knowledge and skill, the universe will ultimately be infused with computronium and with the vast intelligence of our human-machine civilization. So the universe will wake up, and we will intelligently decide its fate.
Okay, so who was that doucher that we just listened to? His name is Ray Kurzweil. He's a futurist. And I wanted to highlight something. The reason why I started with that one, I wanted to highlight, you see how he talked about computronium and making the universe intelligent. And this is sort of just a subtle distinction from a panpsychic worldview that so many people who dive into the psychedelics would actually believe in, that they would see the world as that it's all consciousness, for example, and that they themselves are a small little substantiation of that conscious activity in the universe, and that's why who they think they are is an illusion, because who they really need to be is that fully realized conscious self, the consciousness of the universe. And so you see how the technologies of transcendence, drugs throughout the history of religions, be it ayahuasca, mushrooms, LSD, hashish, opium, paganum harmala, all these different substances that tied to the spirituality is often a sort of divine mind theology. And you can see this worship of intelligence also in the transhumanists, also in the singularists, that it's all about intelligence. They'll even talk about the uploading of consciousness to a computer. He talks about sending our intelligence through wormholes. This stuff is entirely speculative. The wormholes, the black holes, where you're going to be on the back end of a black hole, a wormhole. Nobody knows this stuff. This stuff is incredibly speculative, and so much of the futurisms and the technological singularity is built on presuppositions that are speculative. This stuff is not a definitive point that we're going to get to exponential returns in our medical systems, in our digital technologies, in our life expectancies, and all this different stuff. We're going to reverse aging. We're all going to become smarter because you and I are going to fuse ourselves with the internet and the hive mind. That it's interesting that people who would not perceive themselves as spiritual actually have a sort of spiritual worldview much more akin to the psychedelics, to the sort of psychedelic mysticism. I just find that really, really interesting and leads credence to this idea that if drugs are your gateway towards spiritual reality, well, then you're building fundamental presuppositions that build a sort of materialistic spirituality. And if that's the case, you can see the natural progression into the singularity, the technological singularity, where the computers and the digital cybernetic interface is actually going to fulfill all the yearnings of the materialistic processes of various drugs. And so who we just watched a video of is this gentleman named Ray Kurzweil. He's an American inventor and futurist. He is involved in fields such as optical character recognition, text-to-speech synthesis, speech recognition technology, and electric keyboard instruments. He has written books on health, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and the technological singularity and futurism. Kurzweil is a public advocate for the futurist and transhumanist movements that give public talks to share his optimistic outlook on life extension technologies and the future of nanotechnology, robotics, and biotechnology. And so don't need to spend a whole lot of time here. He has done a lot of work in Silicon Valley. He has invented a lot of different things. And he's kind of really taken the mantle of the sort of transhumanist, technological singularity agenda. He's sort of the singularity prophet, if you will. And he's written about the books. He has multiple books on this topic. And I remember back when I was really into the sort of psychedelics and the psychedelic spirituality and concepts of magic, that I was swept up, similar to the Rogan-esque crowd, right? Joe Rogan and many of his listeners, thinking about the singularity and how it seems to be inevitable. Don't you see the rise in technology? Look at the technology they use to get on the moon, and then look at how much technology is in your smartphone and this or that. We could see this steady connection of progress, again, that I now view as an Orthodox Christian as a sort of progressive movement away from Christ or divine order, or the Logos, generally speaking. And I think that's why so many of these people who are also in favor of these life extensions for themselves as elitists are also in favor of the depopulation of the planet due to overcrowding in the third world. And I guarantee you that many of these people promote the stabbies and the mandating of these. And so his theory is all about the law of accelerating returns. But I want to just flip our attention now over to this article. And I got a couple different articles I want to show you guys, but this is one more recently titled "The Responsibility of Immortality. Welcome to the new transhumanism." And so interesting, as we'll see, it's tied to thinkers like Timothy Leary, psychedelics, the promise and the hopefulness for sort of these digital technologies. And so we're going to read through this short article. It's not very long. Actually, it's a little bit longer than I expected, but it's got some good stuff in here. And then I want to play a longer video of Ray Kurzweil talking about what he believes the technological singularity is going to lead to, which is obviously immortality itself. In the summer of 1990, I was running a pretty weird nightclub in the Roppongi neighborhood of Tokyo. I was deeply immersed in the global cyberpunk scene and working to bring the Tokyo node of this fast-expanding post-human science fiction and psychedelic-fueled movement online. The Japanese scene was more centered around video games and multimedia than around acid and the psychedelics. And Timothy Leary, a dean of the 1960s counterculture and proponent of psychedelia who was always fascinated with anything mind-expanding, was interested in learning more about it. Tim anointed the Japanese youth, including the 24-year-old me, quote, the new breed, unquote. He adopted me as a grandson, and we started writing a book about the new breed together, starting with, quote, tune in, turn on, and take over, as a riff of Tim's original and very famous turn on, tune in, and drop out. We never finished the book, but we did end up spending a lot of time together. I should dig out my old notes and finish the book. Tim introduced me to his friends in the Los Angeles and San Francisco. They were a living menagerie of the counterculture of the 1960s in the U.S. There were the traditional New Age types, hippies, cyberpunks, and transhumanists too. Let me zoom in on this so you guys can see a little bit more. 2, in my early 20s, I was an eager and budding techno-utopian, dreaming of the day when I would become immortal and ascend to the stars, and into cryogenic slumber to awake on a distant planet. Or perhaps I would have my brain uploaded into a computer network to become part of some intergalactic superbrain. And that's what Ray Kurzweil was actually insinuating. And somebody like a Terence McKenna was also believed, his theory was, it was either time machines were going to come on 2012, it was the end of the world, it was the end of time, or the singularity was going to occur and people were going to be able to upload their consciousness to a digital interface and live forever. We've been yearning for immortality at least since the Epic of Gilgamesh. In Greek mythology, Zeus grants Eos' mortal lover, Tithonus, immortality. But the goddess forgets to ask for eternal youth as well. Tithonus grows old and decrepit, begging for death. When I hear about life extension today, I'm often perplexed, even frustrated. Are we talking about eternal youth, eternal old age, or having a cryogenically frozen brains thawed out 2,000 years from now to perform tricks in a future alien zoo? The latest enthusiasm for eternal life largely stems not from any acid-soaked, tie-dyed counterculture, but from the belief that technology will enhance humans and make them immortal. Today's transhumanist movement, sometimes called H+, encompasses a broad range of issues and diversity of belief, but the notion of immortality, or more correctly, amortality, is the central tenet. Transhumanists believe that technology will inevitably eliminate aging or disease and cause of death, and instead turn death into the result of an accidental or voluntary physical intervention. As science marches forward and age reversal and the elimination of diseases becomes a real possibility, what once seemed like a science fiction dream is becoming a more real, transforming the transhumanist movement and its role in society from a crazy subculture to a Silicon Valley money and technology-fueled shot on goal and more of a practical hedge than the sci-fi dreams of its progenitors. And I wanted to know, again, preparing for some of this stuff, I was thinking about how evil always wants to force, and how funny it would be, based on different theories that we're looking at regarding maybe some of the Kufid stuff, is how they are voluntarily killing people for the purpose of depopulation. What if we get to a point, like, again, theoretically, I don't think it's ever going to get to this point, but what if, again, in their world, they got to a point where they could keep people alive forever, and that was a sort of prison, where death would be yearned for, death would be hoped for, death would be prayed for, because the mastermind, the physical gods, the incarnation of the evil one, if you will, in this world, wanted to keep people alive and never allow them to die. That's a little interesting thought that I had preparing for today's stream. Anyways, transhumanism can be traced back to Futurists in the 1960s, most notably FM 230. As the development of a new computer-based technologies began to turn into a revolution to rival the Industrial Revolution, Max Moore defined transhumanism as the effort to become, quote, post-human, unquote, through scientific advances like mind uploading. He developed his own variant of transhumanism and named it Extropy, and together with Tom Morrow founded the Extropy Institute, whose email list created a community of extopians in the internet's cyberpunk era. Its members discussed AI, cryonics, nanotech, crypto anarchy, among other things, and some reverted to transhumanism, creating an organization known as Humanity Plus. As the tech revolution continued, extropians and transhumanists began effectively experimenting with technology's ability to deliver immortality. In fact, Timothy Leary planned to have his head frozen by Alcor, preserving his brain and presumably his sense of humor and unique intelligence. But as he approached his death, I happened to visit him the night before he died in 1996. The vibe of the Alcor team moving weird cryo gear into his house creeped him out, and he ended up opting for the, quote, shoot my ashes into the space path, which seemed more appropriate to me as well. All of his friends got a bit of his ashes too, and having Timothy Leary ashes became, quote, a thing for a while. It left me wondering, every time I spoke to groups of transhumanists shaking their fist in the air and rattling their Alcor, quote, freeze me when I die bracelets, how many would actually go through with the freezing. That was 20 years ago. The transhumanist and extropian movements and even the Media Lab have gotten more sober since those techno-utopian days when even I was giddy with optimism. Nonetheless, as science fiction gives way to real science, many of the Zong, I'm not sure what that is, if only conversations are becoming arguments about when and how, and the shift from Haight-Ashbury to Silicon Valley has stripped the movement of its tie-dye and beads and replaced them with Pied Piper shirts. Just as the road to hell is paved with good intentions, the road that brought us Cambridge Analytica and the Pizzagate conspiracy, yes, was paved with optimism and oath to not be evil. Renowned Harvard geneticist George Church once told me that the breakthroughs in biological engineering are coming so fast we can't predict how they will develop going forward. CRISPR, a low-cost gene editing technology that is transforming our ability to design and edit the genome, was completely unanticipated. Experts thought it was impossible until it wasn't. Next-generation gene sequencing is decreasing in price far faster than Moore's law of processors. In many ways, bioengineering is moving faster than computing. Church believes that immortality and age reversal will seem difficult and fraught with issues until they aren't. He is currently experimenting with age reversal in dogs using gene therapy. That has been successful in mice, a technique he believes is the most promising of 9 broad approaches to mortality and aging: genome stability, telomere extension, epigenetics, proteostasis, caloric restriction, mitochondrial research, cell syncing, I'm not even sure what that is, stem cell exhaustion, and intercellular communication. Church's research is but one of the key discoveries giving us hope that we may someday understand aging and possibly reverse it. My bet is that we will significantly lengthen, if not eliminate, the notion of, quote, a natural lifespan, although it's impossible to predict exactly when. But what does this mean? Making things technically possible doesn't always make them so societally possible or even desirable, and just because we can do something doesn't mean we should, as we're increasingly realizing, watching the technologies we had developed transform into dark zombies instead of the wonderful utopian tools their designers imagined. Human beings are tremendously adaptable and resilient, and we seem to quickly adjust to almost any technological change. Unfortunately, not all our problems are technical, and we are really bad at fixing social problems, even the ones that we like to think we've fixed, like racism, keep morphing and getting stronger, like drug-resistant pathogens. Don't get me wrong, I think it's important to be optimistic and passionate and to push the boundaries of understanding to improve the human condition. But there is a religious tone in some of the arguments, and even a, quote, way of the future church, which believes that the, quote, creation of a super intelligence is inevitable, unquote. As Yuval Harari writes in Homo Deus, quote, new technologies kill old gods and give birth to new gods, unquote. When he was still just Sir Martin Rees, now Lord Martin Rees, once told a group of us a story, which has been retold in various forms in various places, about how he was interviewed by what he called, quote, the Society for the Abolition of Involuntary Death in California. The members offered to put him in cryonic storage when he died, and when he politely told them he'd rather be dead than in a deep freeze, they called him a deathist. Transhumanists correctly argue that every time you take a baby aspirin or have open heart surgery, you're intervening to make your life better and longer. They contend that there is no categorical difference between many modern medical procedures and the quest to beat death. It's just a matter of degree, and I tend to agree. Yet we can clearly imagine the perils of immortality. Would dictators hold on to power endlessly? How would universities work if faculty never retired? Would the population explode? Would endless life be only for the wealthy? And would the poor be forced to toil forever? Clearly, many of our social and philosophical systems would break. Back in 2003, Francis Fukuyama and our post-human future, consequence of the biotechnology revolution, warned us of the perils of life extension and explained how biotech was taking us into a post-human future with catastrophic consequences to civilization, even with the best intentions. I think it's unlikely that we'll be uploading our minds to computers anytime soon, but I do believe changes that challenge what it means to be, quote, human are coming. Maybe like mRNA technology Kufid stabbies. Philosopher Nikola Danilov in his Transhumanist Manifesto says, quote, we must all respect autonomy and individual rights of all sentience throughout the universe, including humans, non-human animals, and any future AI, modified life forms, or other intelligences. Yeah. AI, I love that one. That sounds progressive and good. Yeah. Still, in his manifestos, Nikola also writes, quote, transhumanists of the world unite. We have immortality to gain and only biology to lose. That sounds a little scary to me. I poked Nikola about this, and he pointed out that he wrote this manifesto a while ago, and his position has become more subtle. But many of his peers are as radical as ever. I think transhumanism, especially its strong, passionate base in exuberant Silicon Valley, could use an overhaul that makes it more attentive to and integrated with our complex societal systems. At the same time, we need to help the, quote, left behind parts of society, maybe the unstabbed, catch up and participate in, rather than just become subjected to the technological transformations that are coming. Now that the dog has caught the car, transhumanism has to transform our fantasy into a responsible reality. I, for one, still dream of flourishing in the future through advances in science and technology, but hopefully one that addresses societal inequities, retains the richness of diversity of our natural systems and indigenous cultures, rather than the somewhat simple and sterile futures depicted by many science fiction writers and futurists. Timothy Leary liked to remind us to remember our hippie roots with the celebration of diversity and nature, and I hear him calling us again. So, hilarious, definitely hilarious. But we see how psychedelics and the quest for immortality are really tied together in many, many facets. Now, I want to shift this conversation over to the elixir of life. This is something that, again, many different cultures around history have striven for. The elixir of immortality, sometimes equated with the philosopher's stone. And the Philosopher's Stone is really the rhetoric that's going to be used in regards to European alchemy and how European alchemy is questing for immortality through the Philosopher's Stone. But the Elixir of Life is a potion that supposedly grants the drinker eternal life and or eternal youth. The elixir was also used to cure all diseases. Alchemists in various ages and cultures sought the means of formulating the elixir. The modern concept probably originated in ancient India or China, independently in Mesopotamia and Japan, or these Asian cultures preceding the concept in Europe by a millennia. And so let's just read a description of the elixir of life in a few of these different ancient civilizations, such as Mesopotamia. The first known instance in literature is found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh fears his own declining years after the death of his beloved companion Enkidu. He sees the Unaptishtim, a Noah-like figure in Mesopotamian mythology in which he was a servant of the great alchemist, of the rain, who later became immortal to seek out the advice of the king Herod in the land of fire. Gilgamesh is directed to find a plant at the bottom of the sea, which he does, but seeks to test it on old man before trying it on himself. Unfortunately, it is eaten by a serpent before he could do so. And so just think about the symbolism there. So, of course, Gilgamesh has to go find a plant. He has to consume a particular plant for immortality. It's given by an alchemist, a deific alchemist, and it's eaten by a serpent before he's able to get it. Interesting symbolism. Now, in China, obviously we have in China these things called the immortals. So I don't know if you guys have heard of the 8 immortals. You have the Taoist immortals. In Taoism, it was common for Taoist monks, Taoist adepts, to try to quest for immortality. This was related to concepts of qi, various martial arts. In fact, here, this little article. Furthermore, they have been linked to the initial development of Qigong exercises. There are some of the Chinese martial arts styles named after them. This is talking about the 8 immortals of China. Some drunken boxing styles, the 8 immortal archetypes for conditioning, Qigong / meditation, and combat training. But they have a sort of mythology around them. Again, this is all related to Taoism. But in China, many rulers of ancient China sought the fabled elixir to achieve eternal life. During the Qin dynasty, Qin Shi Huang sent Taoist alchemist Shu Fu to the eastern seas with 500 young men and 500 young women to find the elixir in the legendary Pinglai mountain, but returned without finding it. He embarked on a second voyage with 3,000 young girls and boys, but none of them ever returned. Legend has it he is to be found in Japan instead. The ancient Chinese believed that ingesting long-lasting precious substances such as jade, cinnabar, hematite would confer some of the longevity on that person who consumed them. Gold was considered particularly potent, as it was non-tarnishing precious metal. The idea of potable and drinkable gold is found in China by the end of the 3rd century BC. The most famous Chinese alchemical book, the Danjing Yaozhu, essential formulas of alchemical classics attributed to Sun Simiao, a famous medical specialist respectively called, quote, King of Medicine. By later generations, discusses in detail the creation of elixirs for immortality. Mercury, sulfur, and salts of mercury and arsenic are prominent and most are poisonous, as well as those of certain diseases and the fabrication of precious stones. Many of these substances, far from contributing to longevity, were actively toxic and resulted in Chinese alchemical elixir poisoning. The Jiajing emperor in the Ming dynasty died from ingesting a lethal dose of mercury and the supposed, quote, elixir of life conjured by alchemists. And so this was even popular in India. The Amrita, the elixir of life, has been described in the Hindu scriptures, not to be confused with Amrit, related to the Sikh religion. Anybody who consumes even a tiniest portion of Amrita has been described to gain immortality. Legend has it that at early times when the inception of the world had taken place, evil demons had gained strength. This was seen as a threat to the gods, the devas, who feared them. So these gods, including Indra, the sky god, and Vayu, the god of wind, and Agni, the god of fire, and don't mind you, Soma, a psychedelic inebriating god that people ingested, went to seek advice and help from the primary gods according to the Hindus. This is called the Trimurti. Vishnu, it really goes Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. They suggested that Amrit could only be gained from the Samudra Manthan, or churning of the ocean, for the ocean and its depth hid mysterious and secret objects. Vishnu agreed to take to form of a turtle, on whose shell a huge mountain was placed. The mountain was used as a churning pool. With help of a Vasuki, the churning process began at the surface. From one side, the gods pulled the serpent, which had coiled itself around the mountain, and the demons pulled it from one side to another, as the churning process required immense strength. Hence, the demons were persuaded to do the job. They agreed in return for a portion of Amrit. Finally, with their combined efforts, the gods and demons, Amrit emerged from the ocean depths, similar to the Gilgamesh legend. All the gods were offered the drink, but the gods managed to trick the demons who did not get the holy drink. Mercury was so vital to alchemy everywhere. It was mentioned in the 4th to 3rd century BC. About the same time it encountered China and in the West, evidence of the idea transmuting base metals to gold appears in 2nd to 5th century AD Buddhist texts. It also is possible that the alchemy of medicine and immortality came to China from India, or vice versa. In any case, for both cultures, gold making appears to have been a minor concern, and medicine the major concern. But the elixir of immortality was of little importance in India, which had other avenues to immortality, yoga, this type of stuff. The Indian elixirs were mineral remedies for specific diseases, or at most to promote long life. And I also want to highlight a fundamental difference here between the Chinese and the Indians, is that these Indians that are engaging in the alchemical processes, is they believed in reincarnation. They believed in the process of samsara and moksha, whereas the Chinese, especially the Taoists, they believe in heaven and hell. And so the primacy on one's specific life is a little bit different. And I think explains a little bit, or maybe partially, to why the quest for immortality wasn't as important for the Indians as it was for the Chinese. And the same thing is true for the people in our world. I would say Ray Kurzweil, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, these people don't believe in heaven and hell. Let me regard that. They don't believe in reincarnation. They believe in just a blackness, a single death, and you die. And so for them, they're trying to avoid that at all costs. So they don't have a reincarnational cycle like the Indians do. Europe, we have the alchemical tradition, and then this one's talking a little bit about Japan. But I want to move this article over here. Which one? Here it is. Survival of the richest. I want to share with this article to you guys from the UK. Survival of the richest. Could the elite class of superhumans upgrade their way to immortality? Oh my gosh. Are you ready to become a cyborg or get an upgrade on your brain? The super rich are looking at ways to become superhuman, and you could be left behind. Yes, as they want to mix you with their gene therapy and slowly kill you, they're making sure that they become cyborgs. If you had bad eyesight, would you wear glasses? If you lost a leg, would you get a prosthetic? If one of your organs failed, would you get a transplant? What about if you wanted a 360-degree vision? Would you get an eye implanted on the back of your head? Humans have been using science. You see how ridiculous these analogies are? Anywho, humans have been using science and technology to improve their lot in life for centuries. It's one of the things that sets us apart from the rest of the animals on the planet. I'm surprised they even recognize a difference between us and the animals on the planet. That's, of course, I think the elitists do, obviously. I think people that are more almost hyper-rationalistic and into these like immortal technologies, they're not the same as these progressive types. But anywho, for the most part, these efforts have been constrained by our understanding of the human condition and what is considered to be normal and natural. But what if, rather than just fixing things when they go wrong, we could improve on what nature has given us? This is the question that drives the intellectual and philosophical movement known as transhumanism, which has been gathering pace across the globe. The rise of cyborg, or transhumanists believe that mankind can evolve beyond its current physical and mental limitations to become superhuman and eventually immortal. It's the rise of cyborgs. Perhaps the most prominent transhumanist is a man called Zoltan Istvan, who is currently running for president of the United States as the leader of the Transhumanist Party. Istvan believes that people have the right to modify their bodies in any way they want, as long as the modifications don't hurt anybody else. Libertarianism. Moreover, he believes that people can give themselves significant advantages in life by, quote, upgrading their bodies using technology. If you show up to work and your construction worker friend now has robotic arms and can carry 5 times the amount you can, he'll get promoted faster. So the idea of merging with machines is becoming more evolutionarily reasonable, he said. In 15 to 20 years, it'll be very common for someone to say, I had an upgrade on my arm and I'm happy about it, and I'm looking for the next model. Sort of like we look for the next model of iPhone. Yes, let's do biological consumerism. Biological consumerism. You love the same people who want to critique the societal structures or tax the rich. I mean, obviously, most of these people are the rich, but it is funny nonetheless. It may sound like stuff of science fiction, but it's not as implausible as it first appears. From bionic limbs to chips implanted in people's hands, aha, the mark of the beast, that allow them to control the environment around them. There are already plenty of examples of people who have gained, quote, superhuman powers with the help of technology. Billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk has even talked about something called neural lace, well, now it's neural link, which would allow people to connect their brains with an artificial intelligence network to instantly access online information. Oh, all that information that's also being edited in live time for most of us. Everyone says the human body is magnificent. It's nothing of the sort. Biology is an incredibly frail system. There's not a sensible person that doesn't believe a robot is going to run 100 times faster than a human being, said Istvan. Machines are going to be systematically better than us in every single way we do, including work. And that's why we absolutely have to integrate ourselves into them, or we're going to be left behind. Gene editing. It's not just about turning ourselves into cyborgs. Scientists were recently given the green light to conduct human trials on the gene editing tool known as CRISPR. CRISPR is already being used to grow human organs for transplants inside pigs and develop part human, part animal chimera embryos. Oh, lovely. Which could treat diseases. It is thought the technique could even be used to eliminate certain types of cancers. Oh, those cancers that didn't exist until the modern contemporary world. Istvan believes that CRISPR could soon be used for, quote, biohacking, a type of cosmetic surgery designed to make human body better, stronger, and more efficient. I have friends that want to grow an eye on the back of their head. It sounds crazy, but actually there's already been some success with growing some of these things, and it's really not that complicated to connect something to the optic nerve, he said. The question, of course, is perception and how that would change your visual outlook, but still, I think the biology is only 3 to 5 years away from us being able to at least start experimenting with this kind of thing and seeing if it works. Mind you, this article was written in 2016, guys, 2016. Also, everyone, please smash that like. Please smash that like and send all your super chats to Streamlabs if you could. Please use Streamlabs. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. Achieving immortality. Some transhumanists believe that gene editing technologies like CRISPR could eventually be used to slow or even prevent the aging process. The thing about genes is they're responsible for generating each successive generation of cells to keep our bodies going, said Steve Fuller, professor of sociology at Warwick University, who debated the issue with Istvan at the recent Brain Bar Budapest Festival. Quote, but as time goes on, those cells deteriorate. So it's like having a poor and poor Xerox. And that's how we grow old and debilitate. But, of course, we have a pretty good understanding of the biochemistry behind this. So, in principle, it could be possible to either arrest or even reverse this kind of aging process at the genetic level. Through a combination of robotics and advancement in gene editing, it's becoming increasingly likely that, within a matter of decades, humans will be able to extend their lifespans indefinitely. Istvan, as parts of his, quote, transhumanist Bill of Rights, unquote, claims that aging is a disease, and that there should be a universal right to immortality. We're not saying you have to live forever. We're just saying we want the choice, he said. Quote, it's crazy that we live under the specter of death, that death is, quote, natural. There's nothing natural on planet Earth anymore. Whatever we can't do, we call natural. But we change that all the time as human beings as we pick up tools and explore the universe. Quote, so we're trying to get people to look at death as something that's not natural either. It's just something to be overcome. It's just a big giant roadblock on the way to becoming godlike human beings. And so from that quote right there, again, us as Christians, we can see death as an enemy. Absolutely. We talk about death as an enemy and how we have to, and that's what Christ did. He came to defeat death. He defeated death by death. And so us, to attain our immortal status, to participate in the eternal kingdom of God, we have to pass through the doorway of death, which has already been defeated. We can't do it in this realm. So we can see as Christians, we have a sort of similar understanding of death as an enemy, but definitely have different ways about going about it. And through theosis, we do become godlike. Upgrading your brain. While many people find the idea of staying 30 forever very attractive, there is no use having a fit young body if your brain continues to deteriorate. Istvan admits that the brain, quote, is the most complex organism to deal with, but claims that advancement in stem cells technology could one day enable brain cells to regenerate. He also believes that it will eventually be possible for people to, quote, upload their brains to a computer and continue living that way. Meanwhile, Fuller talks about a branch of transhumanism called neurocosmetology, which is based on the idea that by taking some kind of drug cocktail, you could periodically turn up your brain so that you're able to function much more effectively. While this may seem desirable to some employers who want to see their workers firing on all cylinders, it calls into question the ethics of enabling people to artificially enhance their intellectual performance. And so we're going to skip the whole thing on steroids. A new class divide. Moreover, there's the question of who will be able to afford to become superhuman. And this is where we're starting to see the Great Reset. We're starting to see a single stratification between those who have and those who have not on the world. And this is why eradicating the middle class. This is part of the Great Reset, eradicating the middle class. Moreover, there's the question of who will be able to afford to become, quote, superhuman. As with other cosmetic surgeries, this type of medical procedure is unlikely to be offered on the National Health Service, but it will most likely be restricted to an elite group of super rich people. Fuller warns that transhumanism could end up exaggerating the inequalities that already exist in society, whereby only the rich are able to access the technologies that enable them to think better and live longer. Let's say I'm a rich guy who takes some kind of experimental drug that's illegal otherwise. Let's say it doesn't go well. I can probably afford to get myself cured. So the fact that it has negative consequences doesn't really impinge on me that much, he said. My view is I think it's inevitable that richer people will get access to this stuff, but I think the key thing is to have them open and publicly report the results of using this stuff. This will allow public health services like the NHS to start redrawing the boundaries around what it means to live a, quote, normal life and what relevant medical health care is necessary for that. So, quote, For example, people are given eyeglasses because of being able to see properly is considered to be a normal part of living as a human being, but we may need to expand that to include some of these other kind of drug treatments and prosthetics, said Fuller. Istvan agrees that there is a risk transhumanism could lead to inequality. A robotic heart, for instance, currently costs around $200,000, meaning that only a tiny proportion of people in the world could ever afford to buy one. And so now I want to move you to what Ray Kurzweil, check this video out. Here you go.
Can't even possibly comprehend. So thank you for being with us. I want to start the conversation here, which is, you talk about the idea of physical immortality, and you say that this is going to be possible by 2045. Explain yourself.
Well, I'll never be able to come on the stage and say I've done it. I've lived forever, because it's never forever. But I talk about 3 bridges to radical life extension. I've written a few health books. Bridge 1 is what you can do right now to stay healthy the old-fashioned way so that we can get to Bridge 2. A key idea of mine is that information technology progresses exponentially, and health and medicine is now an information technology, and that was enabled by the Genome Project, which was a perfect exponential. And that first genome cost $1 billion. We're now down to a few $1,000s per genome, but it's not just collecting this object code of life that's progressing exponentially. Our ability to understand it, to model it, to simulate it, and most importantly, to reprogram it is growing exponentially. And we're now getting clinical applications of biotechnology. For example, you can now fix a broken heart, not yet from romance. That'll take a few more developments in virtual reality, but we can actually, half of all heart attack survivors have a damaged heart. We can now fix that by reprogramming adult stem cells. We're regrowing organs, successfully installing them with the patient's own DNA in animals, and we'll do that in humans soon. We could talk all day about these examples. What's now a trickle will be a flood by the end, within 10 years. That's Bridge 2, and that'll get us to Bridge 3.
Mind you, this video is from January 2017. At least that's the upload date on this channel. I'm not sure if it was a little bit earlier than that. But so they fully expect these technologies to be flourishing, at least coming to fruition by 2030, 2045 consistently. And really, Kurzweil is the main guy that's promoted this 2045 number, of which he's pushed back. And that's the other thing that I always found so funny is, think of all the people who watched Back to the Future and thought we'd be flying on skateboards by now. And in reality, we have a fascistic government in Australia. They're literally trying to break people's brains with the anti-logic of that I got stabbed and my stabby only works if you get stabbed, and because you're unstabbed, I'm not inoculated. Just everything. The whole narrative right now that we're being given is totally upside down. And yeah, anyways, I'm rambling, but let's continue.
3, where we'll have medical nanorobots, little robots that are computerized, that are the size of blood cells, that basically finish the job of the immune system. We have intelligent devices the size of blood cells that keep us healthy. They are blood cells, our T cells, but they evolved thousands of years ago, and it was not in the interest of the human species for us to live very long. So they don't recognize cancer, for example, because that gets us later on in life. It thinks, oh, that's me, and doesn't go after it. We can finish the job with these medical nanorobots. There are detailed designs, actually, how to go after every disease once we have these devices. That's a 2030 scenario. So that's the third bridge. Ultimately, we're going to merge with artificial intelligence. We can talk more about that.
The singularity. The reason I wanted to bring this up is just the idea as we all sit here trying to understand what the future actually looks like. And part of that future, in your mind at least, is something known as the singularity.
Right. Well, we start with the idea of extending our mental capacity with AI. So we've already done that. You misplaced your cell phone, so
Morning, yes.
You're not enhanced at the moment, but You know, most people, if they leave their cell phone, they feel like they're incomplete. So they're not yet inside our bodies and brains. There are some people that have computers in their brains, like Parkinson's patients, but that'll be routine in the 2030s. Another application of these medical nanorobots will be to connect our neocortex, that's the outer layer of the brain, that's where we do our thinking, to the cloud. Now, if you remember, 2 million years ago, we got these large foreheads. We were, before that, walking around with a slanted brow and no frontal cortex. And we got this additional quantity of neocortex. And what we did with it is we put it at the top of the neocortical hierarchy. And as you go up the hierarchy, issues become more interesting and more complex. And that was the enabling factor for humanoids to invent language and art and poetry and newspapers and conferences. No other species does that. But it was a one-shot deal. Our skull couldn't keep expanding, or childbirth would have been impossible. We'll connect our neocortex wirelessly to the cloud, just the way your cell phone does it. Most of the things you do with that do not take place in the phone. They connect to the cloud. The cloud is pure information technology. It is doubling in power every year as we speak. And we will then connect to simulated neocortex in the cloud and add again, just like we did 2 million years ago, to our neocortical hierarchy. But this time it won't be a one-shot deal. The cloud is pure information technology. It's expanding exponentially. And so we will be a hybrid of biological thinking and non-biological thinking, which I believe has already started with these devices outside our body. And we'll become smarter. By 2045, we'll expand our intelligence a billion-fold. That's such a profound transformation that we borrow this metaphor from physics and call it a singular change in human history.
When do we get to designer babies? And I ask because I had spent some time in a research lab in Berkeley working with CRISPR, a gene editing tool, which is really on the cusp of where all of this may ultimately go. Do you think that's realistic?
Yes, I mean, certainly there are genetic diseases we would want to edit out that are just devastating diseases, and that we are beginning to now and making exponential progress in understanding the genetic codes that cause those diseases. That, you know, if you were told you could edit that out of your child's genome, you would want to do that. I think that's much less significant than augmenting our intelligence through artificial intelligence. That's going to make us vastly more intelligent, far beyond what we could sort of engineer by optimizing our biology.
Right. Okay, final question from me, and then I want to throw it open to the audience. This is news you can use. Ray happens to take 90 different pills a day because he plans to stay alive for a very long time. Walk us through your regimen.
Okay, well, people say you take all these supplements and other pills, that's going to enable you to live hundreds of years, and the answer is no. That's just to get to Bridge 2, and Bridge 2 is not far away. According to my models, 10 to 15 years from now, we'll be adding more than a year every year to your remaining life expectancy. Now, life expectancy is a statistical phenomena. You could have a computed life expectancy.
Hold on, how old are you now?
People think I look pretty good for 95. I'm 68.
Okay, so tell us what you take.
Well, that would take us all day, but I'll give you one example of an actual prescription pill, metformin. It's a diabetes drug. We've known for years that all the people that take metformin, and there are millions because it's the most popular diabetes drug, have much lower cancer rates. So I did some research with some MIT scientists, and we discovered why. It actually kills cancer stem cells, which are the real cause of cancer. Now, people don't take it optimally, and you really need to take 500 milligrams every 4 hours to maintain a level that will really keep...
Is that what you do?
Yeah.
Okay.
But even people who take, one every 24 hours have some protection, and we see dramatically lower cancer rates as a result. It's also a caloric restriction mimetic, meaning it causes some of the same changes that eating less causes without eating less. So I actually recommend anyone over 50 take that. So there's a long story.
We all want to call our doctor or go to Walgreens immediately. Tell us what else is on the list. Couple. And then I'll give it over, but this is selfish.
Phosphatidylcholine is you can buy it at Whole Foods. 90% of your cell membrane is that substance, that lipid. When you're 10, it's reduced by 90 or 95% by the time you're 90. That causes the organs to work less well. That's why your skin gets less supple. That's why the baby's skin is so soft and smooth. You can reverse that by simply supplementing with that substance. So there's a lot of different stories. I've written several health books about this.
Hi, Scott Lowen. The idea of radical life extension is exciting, but on a planet where the population is growing increasingly exponentially.
Uh-oh, it's time for the stabbies.
Talk a little bit about sort of resource utilization and sustainability, and how are we going to solve those issues?
Right. Well, as you know, the first thing that happens when nations get wealthier is the population growth rate goes negative. When we start to significantly reduce the death rate, the population will go up again. We have far more resources than we need. Take energy. So Tom Friedman, I don't know if he's here, but he's written a lot about energy. We have exponential growth, for example, in solar energy. Larry Page and I, this is before he became CEO of Google, were asked by the National Academy of Engineering to study emerging energy technologies. We selected solar because it had been growing exponentially for 25 years, doubling every 2 years. And at that point, it was 0.5% of the world's energy. And people say, 0.5%, it's a nice thing to do, but it's a fringe player. Ignoring the exponential growth, because that's only 8 doublings from 100%. Now it's 2%, still growing, doubling every 2 years. I think Tom has a graph in his book that shows that progression. That's only 6 doublings from 100%. So I presented this to the Prime Minister of Israel recently, and he said, he was actually in my class in the Sloan School in the 1970s, and he said, Ray, do we have enough sunlight to do this with? And I said, yes, we have 10,000 times more than we need. Once we meet all of our energy needs from solar, we'll be using 1 part in 10,000 of the sunlight. And that's just an existence proof, because there's a similar story with geothermal, tidal energy, and wind, and so on. We have thousands of times more energy than we need. I mentioned vertical agriculture. That will provide food at very low cost for the entire population. We'll be able to print out the other physical things we need ultimately with advanced AI-controlled manufacturing technologies in the 2020s. So we'll be able to meet the material needs of the
In the 2020s, guys. In the 2020s, they expect AI to already be able to produce and provide us with all of our material needs, which is including, I don't know if you guys saw the 3D printing of food. I recently saw that, and I'm sure that's going to be coming to a grocery store near you soon.
The population, I talked about snapping together homes from 3D printed Lego modules. People have but land. I mean, we're all crowded together. Well, we're crowded together because we created cities as an early technology so that we could work and play together. Now that virtual reality, it's not yet competitive with real reality, but it's becoming more so. We are spreading out. My work group is all over the world, and we communicate just fine. That'll become more realistic as virtual reality and augmented reality become more realistic. Try taking a train trip anywhere in the world, and you see that 98% of the land is not being used. We use 40% of it for horizontal agriculture, which we'll replace with vertical agriculture. So we have plenty of resources for an expanding population. Even when we dramatically cut the death rate, the biological population will only double every 15 years or so. The power of these technologies doubles every 1 year. That's the exponential growth that I call the law of accelerating returns.
Anyways, I couldn't help but think too, and I've mentioned this before, about how the theological notion that you and I are made in the image of God, and this is how we participate in many of these transcendentals, what philosophy calls the philosophical transcendentals, or Orthodoxy calls the uncreated energies of God, that we are made in the image of God, and being made in the image of God have to become more like God, who incarnated as Jesus Christ, and follow his teachings, try to live our lives in more of an accordance and acquiescence to those truths, to then become God's by grace. And that we then in turn are made in his image and then return back to his image, even though we are ontologically separate. These creators of these technologies, one, they come at them in incredibly magical, arguably satanic, or more Luciferian rather, that we have the light, we have the knowledge, you are in the darkness. Satanists are more into, obviously, a direct inversion, which, of course, that's what they're doing now with truth and logic and all these different things in our society with Kufid, that the thing that they're trying to tell you that cures you actually kills you. But they are making the AI, the singularity, all these things are in the image of the beast, in the image of the fallen self. The beast is 666. The beast is the number of man. And that their God, these technological AIs, technological singularity, the transhumanism, that it's ironically made in the image of fallen man. And it's almost like, again, the AI system is a way for the evil one to become fully carnate. I was thinking about this too while I was preparing for today's stream. It's like the AI system, the ones and zeros, the digital interface, the cybernetic reality is like a way of, the evil one is all about centralization. This is why communism or fascistic forms are any form of centralizing power in a really intense way, or really that's what we see with the corporatism. That's what we see with the central banks. Anybody has to go just look into the Federal Reserve, the history of how that connects with central banking in Europe and around the world, and how central banking families, maybe like the Rothschilds, have been able to influence entire nations, governments, history. That the evil one is always about the centralization, and that the full realization of an AI, of a sort of digital entity that could be anywhere and have access to all sorts of information all around the world, anything that's electronically or connected to the internet, or even not connected to the internet. It's like the evil one almost coming into a physical form. Now, we also understand the evil one taking physical form and human form in regards to the Antichrist, but there's something very interesting about all this stuff that I can't help but notice. Now, I wanted to also show you guys and read an article on the Eucharist. So what is the Eucharist? How do we understand the Eucharist as Orthodox Christians? We also want immortality. We also want to become like gods, lowercase g. We also want to live forever, have no more pain, all these different things. And we participate in this fundamental mystery of how exactly you and I can attain eternality through the Eucharist. And so the Eucharist is a holy mystery or sacrament that is celebrated by the divine liturgy within the Orthodox Church, where the consecrated bread and wine, leavened bread. This is something that it blows my mind how many Catholics don't know that they use unleavened bread. What does it represent? The body and the blood, the wine and the bread. Okay, so did Christ's body rise from the ground? Did he rise from the grave? Did he rise from death? Yeah. So that's why you have leavened bread. The bread rises because the Eucharist is depicting that phenomenon. What do the Catholics do? They use unleavened bread, essentially symbolizing theologically that Christ's body doesn't rise. It didn't rise. And you can see then how the Pope, with his new forums, calling the promotion of the vaccine. Guys, did you just see the nonsense of the Archbishop of Goarch here in America telling his diocese that they can no longer give religious exemptions to Kufid? This is crazy. This is within the Orthodox Church here in America. The Archbishop of the Greek Church told the diocese that no priest, nobody is allowed to give religious exemptions to Kufid. What? Now, luckily, as Orthodox, we don't have a centralized force like the Pope where we are basically dictated. And so I personally perceive the papacy to be evil, but never mind that. Anyways, consecrated through the power of the Holy Spirit becomes the precious body and blood of Jesus Christ that is consumed by prepared Orthodox Christians. Now, interestingly, people accuse Christians as you guys partake in cannibalism. Well, our cannibalism is actually ingesting wine. We're not actually ingesting real blood, right? This is wine that is transfigured in a mystery, through a mystery of the Holy Spirit, that it's consecrated as the precious blood and body of Christ. And so, again, you look into the Greek word symbalo, you're throwing together two realities in a symbol, but it's also the true, as it says here, that Orthodox Christians believe that it is the real presence of God, not merely a sign, is present at the consecration of the gifts. It is the real body and blood of Christ, but at the same time, we call it a bloodless sacrifice. And so we don't consume real blood. But then look at the celebrities. Again, I'm not going to dive into this rabbit hole, but for those of you who don't know, do a little deep dive on maybe BitChute or some of these other video sites or a good search engine on adrenochrome. What is adrenochrome? You guys ever heard of this? Maybe it has something to do with certain neurotransmitters, certain hormones that are released during an extreme state of terror. Maybe it has something to do with some of these satanic cults. Maybe it has something to do with the ingestion of blood that we see ritualistically done throughout human history and religion. Not sure there. Look into that yourself. But we can see these celebrities literally advocate and talk about getting foreskin from little boys and putting the blood on their face so that their face will get younger. We literally see a very, very popular thing within Silicon Valley is getting blood transfusions from younger people. Let me see if I can even pull that up real quick. Blood transfusions from younger people. Let's see. Silicon Valley. I guarantee you something will pop up. Here we go. Silicon Valley doofs are spending $8,000 to inject themselves with the blood of young people. Huh? Wow. It's almost like, again, we can see a satanic inversion from the way that Orthodox Christianity can promise you the access to these gifts and mysteries. And then what the world is offering us. Continually an inversion. You know, I just pulled this article up. I'm not going to read through it. Well, I guess it's short here. So it says, Silicon Valley is the kind of place that's impossible to parody. It's a place that's so saturated with money and magical thinking that it's produced people who think they can hack their own bodies into immortality. Again, I just pulled this up. So in this environment, it's not surprising that entrepreneurs find health and wellness inspiration in literal vampires. Yes, literal vampires. Startups like Ambrosia have marketed, quote, young blood plasma harvested from youths between 16 and 25 years old, claiming that it rejuvenates organs and fights the effects of aging. Founder Jesse Karmazin told Business Insider that he charged $8,000 for a single liter and a discounted $12,000 for two. Among other things, the blood is allegedly supposed to counteract Alzheimer's, heart disease, memory loss, and even PTSD and multiple sclerosis. The company also performed its own clinical trial, the results of which are really positive, according to Karmazin. We have to take his word on it, because Ambrosia never published the results of the trial. It's kind of backwards looking, medieval approach to health and wellness that brought us, quote, raw water trend, a fad that had Silicon Valley types shelling out for untreated water that, quote, shockingly made people sick. Now, in a not at all stunning turn, the Food and Drug Administration is urging people to knock it off. FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who, again, I wouldn't trust the FDA, told NBC that plasma infusion is not a benign intervention. Now, I know Peter Thiel is one of them, the homosexual CEO and millionaire in Silicon Valley. I know he's one who has been using the blood infusions of young people. So it's interesting how the people who we are up against in regards to an immortality inside this world, this reality, they absolutely are using real blood, whether that be adrenochrome, whether that be the infusions, whether that be foreskin putting on people's faces. Sadly, it's not a joke. They're really doing this stuff. And so another article I wanted to share with you is that the science of transhumanism, how technology will lead to a new race of super intelligent immortal beings. And have you ever noticed that, again, what's the archetype of the evil person who wants to take over the world? The evil genius. That interestingly, and then you look at Lucifer. Lucifer was the most beautiful and the most intelligent. The most beautiful and the most intelligent. And it's almost like his admiration over his own beauty and intelligence is infusing the people who are moving and wanting and obsessing over this transhumanist movement. That's all about intelligence. Remember the video I showed you at the beginning of Ray Kurzweil talking about we're going to send our intelligence through wormholes, and that eventually we're going to, in the next century, in 2200, he wants to fill the universe with human intelligences, meaning machines, all this different stuff. It's crazy. It's crazy. The development of biotechnology could lend disease, aging, and even death. Humans may take on new forms through prosthetics and genetic engineering. So here we go. The rapid development of so-called NBIC technologies, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and information technology and cognitive science are giving rise to possibilities that have long been the domain of science fiction. Disease, aging, and even death are all human realities that these technologies seek to end. They may enable us to enjoy greater, quote, morphological freedom. We could take on new forms through prosthetics and genetic engineering. Advance our cognitive capacities. We could use brain-computer interfaces to link us to advanced artificial intelligence. Yes. I really want to find another video of Ray Kurzweil. I remember I looked at so many on the way preparing for today's stream. Let's see. Kurzweil, Immortality. What was it? I remember I watched. So you can see all these. Dang it. I want to be careful on some of these because I know that I'll get copyrighted. But here it is, right here. Here's a good one.
My name's Aubrey de Grey. I'm a biomedical gerontologist based in Cambridge, and I'm the chairman and chief science officer of a foundation called the Methuselah Foundation. I'm interested in research to combat the process of aging in mammals and eventually in humans.
So this is Aubrey de Grey, PhD, UK, been on the Joe Rogan podcast multiple times. And he's all about, so his angle, again, there's different schools in these transhumanist immortal desires. Some, again, like Ray Kurzweil's more about the blending with machines. Aubrey de Grey's more about the CRISPR, the gene editing, reversing your body from aging. Literally making your body unage itself.
By biotechnological means. And I'm doing this because ultimately aging is very bad for you. It causes an immense amount of suffering, and of course it kills 100,000 people a day, which is twice as many as everything else that kills anyone, all added together. I think it's rather important to do this. I think that old people are people too, so the fact that aging only kills old people is not a reason not to be working on defeating it.
Of course, one key issue, if you have therapies, you have to get them to the right place, which is usually our cells or some targeted cells. It's actually quite a voyage from here to inside your cells. Could you comment on that?
It certainly is, and I think that this is a classic case of evolution being really smart, and the smartest way for us to proceed in our current primitive technological state being to use evolution's tricks as much as possible. So, of course, the standard technique that most people are using for gene therapy, for getting genes into our bodies, is to use viruses, which have evolved for that exact purpose. And
you guys hear that? The ways to get these technologies into people's systems is through viruses. Huh? Whoa. Interesting. Very interesting.
Of course, the default mode of a virus is to be bad for us, but because viruses have such compact DNA, we can engineer that DNA. We can take out the particular genes that make the viruses bad for us and replace them with genes that we want to introduce into the cell. We can also use viruses and other related genetic tricks to actually alter the DNA that's already in our cells by a process called gene targeting, and that may be very important, especially for the approach that I think we're going to have to use to really cure cancer.
One of the things that cancer cells do is they produce telomerase to extend their telomeres, which are these sort of aging beads. And the theory being that one of these little DNA beads falls off every time a cell replicates, and so the cell can only replicate a certain number of times. But cancer cells defeat that and become immortal by producing this one enzyme, telomerase, that extends their telomeres. And so we could combat cancer by destroying or inhibiting the telomerase.
Sure. So a lot of people think that telomere shortening is a really important part of aging, but that's actually pretty much been rejected by the gerontology field now, and I think that rejection is correct. I think that in fact telomere shortening plays only a very minor role, if any, in aging, and only in specific, very few specific tissues. The immune system may be one example, but it's an example which can be combated pretty easily because it's hematopoietic, it's derived from stem cells. The process of cancer, therefore, is the main problem. And to the extent that telomere shortening may be a problem, or indeed that the accelerated telomere shortening that we would cause by inhibiting telomerase as an anti-cancer therapy would be a problem. The correct approach, I think, is to go ahead and damn well do this as a way of getting on top of cancer, and then to cope with the side effects in whatever way seems to be necessary. The conclusion I've come to is that actually it's not going to be too hard to cope with those side effects, because the side effects will be seen most predominantly in tissues that have a rapid turnover, that are maintained by stem cells, things like the blood and the gut and the skin. And these tissues are ones that, precisely because they're maintained from stem cell pools, can be maintained by the periodic replenishment of those pools using cells that have had their telomeres extended outside the body, so that they don't need to have telomerase to carry on extending them inside the body.
Seems like a pretty straightforward approach. I mean, if you can just inhibit telomerase, these cancer cells are no longer immortal and become quite manageable.
That's right.
Guys, I want to make a point that this emphasis on evolution, the evolution of the utility of people, our intelligence, our how long we live, all this different stuff, that this is essential for the sort of ethical basis for what we're seeing right now in regard to the Great Reset. The elite view all of this through a lens of Darwinian Wallace theory of evolution, that you deserve it. The fact you don't even have enough resources means you deserve it. You're probably not productive enough. The fact that you're poor, the fact that you're this or that, means you probably deserve it. So you need to go get your stabbies. And so I loved the point where he was talking about the use of viruses. Yes, the use of viruses, and how they can alter and take in and out these viruses, what they want and what they don't, because the DNA is so compact. Huh. Interesting. Maybe if they, well, anyways.
And people have been looking at the possibility of using drugs to inhibit telomerase for some time, and there's some success in that area. The problem is that if you simply do that, then the cancer cell, of course, which is an ingenious cell that's constantly mutating and thinking of new ways to grow, finds ways, for example, to destroy the drug or to exclude the drug or just to express more telomerase to compensate for the inhibitor or whatever. So I'm adopting a much more aggressive approach, which is to go in and actually delete the telomerase genes using gene targeting, the method I was mentioning a moment ago. And to do this not only in the cancer, but to all our cells, so that all our cells become absolutely unable to carry on living indefinitely. And that, of course, includes our stem cells, which is why this periodic replacement would be needed. But it seems to a lot of biologists that this would be overkill, that this would be going too far, but I feel that those biologists are not taking cancer seriously enough, and that we really do need to take these extreme measures.
But that would make some people nervous who think that some cells need the telomerase to overcome the telomere limitation.
That's right. I mean, I think essentially what we would be doing here is what we'd be gaining is a defense against cancer that really works, and what we'd be losing is the immortality of our stem cells. So we'd be getting the requirement to go in and have our stem cells replenished every 10 years. But that's a pretty easy trade-off to make if you conclude that that's the only way you're going to be able to escape cancer for more than a few more decades.
I'm involved with one project that's targeting cancer stem cells, because a lot of the therapies target the cancer cells, which are like the worker bees, and the cancer stem cell is thought to be like the queen bee. It's really the source of new cancers. And if you could wipe out all the worker bees, and it looks like the cancer's gone, but the queen bee, the cancer stem cell, is still there to regenerate a tumor. Where does that factor in?
So the cancer stem cell field is a really fashionable and growing field at the moment, and there's certainly a lot more that we need to discover in this area. But at the moment, I think there are some very fundamental unanswered questions. One of them is, well, we know that cancer cells are relatively undifferentiated. It may be that cells which do not exhibit a cancer stem cell phenotype are nevertheless becoming cancer stem cells by a sort of de-differentiation process all the time. And if that's true, then just killing the cancer stem cells wouldn't be very effective. However, the main point, of course, is that it doesn't actually matter whether you only kill the cancer stem cells. The point is you definitely have to kill those cells, or else it's not going to work. So absolutely, I think that's correct. But then we have the problem that the cancer stem cells, in many, many ways, are the cells which are least different, least recognizable as different from the cells that are not cancerous, from our normal stem cells. And so we have a therapeutic index problem, of course, of how much of a drug you can give that's not too damaging to the real stem cells, but is damaging to the cancer stem cells. That's why I think we have to take this preemptive approach of actually making the cells inherently have a time bomb in them that means that they just can't divide indefinitely. And even if we have to sacrifice the immortality of our normal stem cells in return for that, and therefore have to go in and every 10 years have a reinfusion of various types of stem cell, that will be an acceptable price to pay. I think, really, if I had to say what the number one thing is that I try to do, both within the scientific community and within the wider world, it's to try to demystify aging, to get people to understand that aging is really just a process of decay, of the accumulation of damage, just in the same way that aging of a car or a house is, and therefore that the combating of aging is simply a repair and maintenance problem, a very boring problem. And all we have to do is figure out enough about the types of damage that we need to fix.
I love the comments in the comment section of our live chat about his beard. Doesn't he remind you of literally like an alchemist? And that's what I was bringing up earlier in the introduction to today's stream, is that this is modern day alchemy. That the concoction of these drugs, the use of these technologies, that this is an alchemical process. And just the fact that that beard, again, I don't even know what his worldview is. He's clearly extremely materialistic. But he reminds you of like one of these old medieval alchemists that, is like off in his work shed with all these bottles of liquids everywhere, hunched over burning mercury.
To be able to come up with the rational design of interventions that can fix them. Once you get that concept through into people's minds, whether they be scientists or journalists or members of the general public, then the whole thing begins to look a great deal more doable, and people start listening to the details a little bit more, and then they start to get optimistic.
I like your metaphor of the aging of a house. Our bodies are a little bit like a house. We inhabit them. And if you don't maintain a house, it's not going to last very long. And if you maintain the house, it can last indefinitely. There are some houses that are thousands of years old. And the only difference between a house and this house that I inhabit is we understand how a house works because we built it. We don't fully understand this house yet. One of my themes is that...
Did somebody else build it? Don't you love that? He's like, well, we know how a house works and how we maintain it because we built the house. We don't understand this. Well, anyways, it's almost like there's a creator, isn't there?
Understanding is proceeding exponentially. The amount of DNA data, for example, we've sequenced has doubled every year, and you can see this exponential growth in every aspect. So, can you relate our understanding and improving understanding of this house, the human body, to this metaphor of gaining the means of fixing what goes wrong?
The big difference between the human body and simpler machines, man-made machines, is, just as you say, because we didn't have the plans. We don't have the plans of the human body, and the human body is also, to be perfectly honest, much more complicated than any man-made machine. So that's a difference of degree. It's a quantitative difference. It doesn't mean that we are, in principle, unable to apply an engineering approach to dealing with this problem, but it does mean that it's damned hard. I think another part of the difference is that because we are one evolved species out of many, many millions of species, we have the opportunity to make use of the diversity that evolution has managed to create for our own purposes. To use, well, we were talking earlier about viruses for gene therapy, for example, to use bacterial enzymes to get rid of indigestible molecules in our bodies. And that process can continue for a long time without our actually getting necessarily a particularly comprehensive understanding of how the body works. I always like to talk about the process of sidestepping our ignorance of our own bodies, because I think it is fair to say that we are still fabulously ignorant about how biology works, about how cells work, let alone how organisms work. I often take the example of RNA interference, which we now know is an absolutely fundamental aspect of the way that cells actually work, and yet it was completely unknown as little as a decade ago when we thought we more or less knew everything about DNA and RNA. So, yeah, there's a long way to go before we understand things, but that doesn't mean that we can't start developing interventions.
Do you personally look forward to getting to that tipping point, that escape velocity, where at least the likelihood is the further out you go, the actual more life expectancy you have?
I certainly look forward to the day when we actually have age-related death and age-related debilitation under control, just in the same way as people look forward to the day when we have AIDS under control or malaria in Africa under control and so on. Ultimately, that's the fundamental reason I'm in this business, is to save lives.
One of the objections I sometimes get is people say, well, yeah, we can extend how long people live, but there's a natural limit, just it's a basic limit biologically to how long humans can live. But what do you say to that?
The concept that there's a basic biological limit to how long people can live, or how long other organisms can live for that matter, is again one of the assumptions that it's easy to dispel just by pointing out that the body is simply a very complicated machine, and therefore that maintaining it and repairing it can extend its life. If we look at machines like cars, for example, or houses, they have a natural limit to how long they live, which exists so long as we only do incomplete repair and maintenance, or rather, shall I say, inadequate repair and maintenance. If the repair and maintenance is sufficiently comprehensive, then we don't have a problem. So that's why, in order to keep, for example, a VW Bug going for 50 years or a vintage classic car going for 100 years, you need to do more than normal. But we can do that. It's just that it takes specialist knowledge. So the specialist knowledge that we need to transcend the supposed biological natural limits on human lifespan is really simply the technology that we need to transcend the biological lower limit on lifespan, the limit that we have been given by nature.
Some thinkers like Andrew Weil said our goal should be healthy aging and not extending life. I sort of feel healthy aging is an oxymoron, but how do you respond to that view?
I absolutely take the view that the concept of successful aging is a contradiction in terms, that aging is a system failure, and nothing could be more ridiculous than to define a concept of successful aging or healthy aging. I think to define it as a short-term goal, to say, well, okay, at the moment we don't have technologies that can seriously impact aging, therefore let's do our best to postpone the decline as much as we can, that's a fine goal.
Promises of immortality have occurred throughout history, and so that's a reason for skepticism. Oh, we've heard this before. So what's different?
One of the things that I found most frustrating, actually, about the way in which the media have discussed my work is that even in quite highfalutin publications, they will always use the word immortality or the phrase living forever to describe what I'm trying to aim for. And in other words, to deliberately conflate the concept of infinite lifespans with the concept of indefinite lifespans. And I've got used to that, and I sort of laugh at it now. But the fact is, I think it's done on purpose, not necessarily consciously on purpose by journalists, but by people in general. If you deliberately confuse immortality with the elimination of aging, then what you're doing is you're confusing something that we know is impossible. It cannot be achieved by human means with something that we might have actually achieved by human means. And that, of course, is another example of the pro-aging trance that I've been talking about so much, the idea that we're trying to put out of our minds the possibility that we might be able to do this so that we can cling to the idea that it's actually a good thing that we can't do it and thereby not think about all these things.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to share that video with you guys. I thought it was worthy watching. So Aubrey de Grey is another big name in this field, but he's much more, as that video indicated, much more into delaying aging, altering genes, using CRISPR, all this different stuff. And so we had a very interesting and insightful stream. We talked about a lot of different things. And now I want to conclude with this article right here by Father Alexander Schmemann, The Christian Concept of Death. The Christian Concept of Death. And so this is where we're going to end today's stream, guys. If you appreciate tonight's stream, you appreciate what we do here on Church of the Eternal Logos, feel free to throw in a super chat with the Streamlabs link. If you prefer YouTube, that is fine as well. If you would like to support becoming a website member, please do so using the members link. Anyways, so The Christian Concept of Death, written by Father Alexander Schmemann. Indeed, if Christ is not risen, then your faith is in vain. These are the words of the Apostle Paul, and they remain fundamental for Christianity to this day. He suffered and was buried, and he rose again. After the cross, after the sin into death, there is the resurrection from the dead. That principle, fundamental and decisive confirmation of the symbol of faith, a confirmation from the very heart of Christianity. Indeed, quote, if Christ is not risen, then your faith is in vain, unquote. These are the words from the Apostle Paul, and they remain fundamental to Christianity to this day. Christianity is a belief, first of all and above all, and the fact that Christ did not remain in the grave, that death shone forth from death, that life shone forth from death, that in Christ's resurrection from the dead, the absolute all-encompassing law of dying and death, which tolerated no exceptions, was somehow blown apart and overcome from within. The resurrection of Christ comprises, I repeat, the very heart of the Christian faith and Christian good news. And yet, however strange it may sound, in everyday life of Christianity and Christians in our time, there is little room for this faith. It is as though obscured, and the contemporary Christian, without being cognizant of it, does not reject it, but somehow skirts about it, and does not live the faith as did the first Christians. If he attends church, he, of course, hears in the Christian service the ever-resounding joyous confirmations, quote, trampling down death by death. Quote, death is swallowed up by victory. Life reigns. And, quote, not one dead remains in the grave, unquote. But ask him what he really thinks about death. And often, too often, alas, you will hear some sort of rambling affirmation of the immortality of the soul and its life in some sort of world beyond the grave. A belief that existed even before Christianity. And that would be in the best circumstances. In the worst, one would be met simply by perplexity and ignorance. Quote, I've never really thought about it, unquote. Meanwhile, it is absolutely necessary to think about it because it is with faith or unbelief, not simply in, quote, the immortality of the soul, but precisely in the resurrection of Christ and in our universal resurrection. At the end of time, that all of Christianity, quote, stands or falls, as they say. If Christ did not rise, then the gospel is the most horrible fraud of all. But if Christ did rise, then not only do all our pre-Christian representations in the belief in the immortality of the soul change radically, but they simply fall away. And then the entire question of death presents itself in a totally different light. And here is the crux of the matter, that the resurrection above all assumes an attitude toward death and a concept of death that is most profoundly different from its usual religious representations. And in a certain sense, this concept is the opposite of those representations. It must be frankly stated that the classical belief in the immortality of the soul excludes faith in the resurrection because the resurrection, and this is the root of the matter, includes in itself not only the soul but also the body. Simply reading the gospel leaves no doubt about it. When they saw the risen Christ, the apostles, as the gospel says, thought they were seeing a ghost or a vision. The first task of the risen Christ was to allow them to sense the reality of his body. He takes food and eats in front of them. He commands the doubting Thomas to touch his body, to be convinced of the resurrection through his fingers. And when the apostles came to believe, it is precisely the proclamation of the resurrection, its reality, its, quote, bodilessness, that becomes the chief content, power, and joy of the preaching, and the main sacrament of the church becomes the communion of bread and wine as the body and blood of the risen Christ. And in this act, says the Apostle Paul, quote, proclaiming the death of the Lord, they confess his resurrection. Those who turn to Christianity turn not to ideas or principles, but they accept this belief in the resurrection, this experience, this knowledge of the risen teacher. They accept faith in the universal resurrection, which means the overcoming, the destruction, the annihilation of death as the ultimate goal of the world. Quote, the last enemy to be destroyed is death, exclaims the Apostle Paul in a sort of spiritual ecstasy. And on every Pascha night we proclaim, O death, where is thy sting? O hell, where is thy victory? Christ is risen, and not one dead remains in the grave. Christ is risen, and life reigns. In this way, the acceptance or non-acceptance of Christ in Christianity is essentially the acceptance or non-acceptance of belief in his resurrection. And in the language of religious representations, that means belief in the union in him of body and soul, of which the dissolution and ruination is death. We are not speaking here about those who reject the resurrection of Christ because they reject the very existence of God, i.e. convinced, or think they are convinced, atheist. The discussion concerns a quite different area. Of much greater importance is the strange, quote, obscurity of faith in the resurrection, which I mentioned, among those very believers, those very Christians who connect in a peculiar way the celebration of Pascha with the actual, perhaps often subconscious rejection of the resurrection of Christ. There has occurred in historical Christianity a sort of return to the pre-Christian concept of death, which consists of, first of all, a recognition of death as a, quote, law of nature, unquote, i.e., a phenomenon inherent in nature itself, with which, for this reason, and no matter how frightening death might be, one must, quote, come to terms, unquote, which one must accept. Indeed, all non-Christian, all natural religions, all philosophies are in essence occupied with our, quote, coming to terms with death, and attempt to demonstrate for us the source of immortal life or the immortal soul in some sort of alien world beyond the grave. Plato, for example, and countless followers after him teach that death is a liberation from the body which the soul desires. And in this circumstance, faith in the resurrection of the body not only becomes unnecessary, but also incomprehensible, even false and untrue. In order to perceive the entire sense of Christian belief in the resurrection, we must begin not from that belief itself, but from the Christian concept of the body and death. Here lies the root of the misunderstanding, even within Christianity. Religious consciousness assumes that the resurrection of Christ is first of all a miracle, which of course it is, But for average religious consciousness, this miracle is even greater. The miracle of all miracles remains, quote, unique, so to speak, pertaining to Christ. And since we acknowledge that Christ is God, this miracle ceases to be a miracle in a certain sense. God is almighty. God is God. God can do anything. Whatever the death of Christ signifies, his divine power and might did not allow him to remain in the grave. Yet the fact of the matter is that all this comprises only half of the age-old Christian interpretation of the resurrection of Christ. The joy of early Christianity, which still lives in the church, in her services, in her hymns and prayers, and especially in the incomparable feast of Pascha, does not separate the resurrection of Christ from the, quote, universal resurrection, which originates and begins in the resurrection of Christ. Celebrating 1 week before Pascha, Christ's raising of his friend Lazarus, the church solemnly and joyfully confirms that this miracle is a, quote, confirmation of the universal resurrection, unquote. But in the minds of the faithful, these two inseparable halves of the faith in the resurrection of Christ and faith in the universal resurrection initiated by him, have somehow become disconnected. What remains intact is the belief in the rising of Christ from the dead, his resurrection in the body, which he invites the doubting Thomas to touch. Reach hither thy finger, and thrust it in my wounds, and be not faithless, but believing. Now, as for our mortal and final destiny and fate after death, which we have begun to call the world beyond the grave, this destiny and fate has gradually ceased to be interpreted in the light of the resurrection of Christ and its relation to it. As far as Christ is concerned, we confirm that he rose from the dead, but as far as we ourselves are concerned, we say that we believe in the immortality of the soul, in which the Greeks and the Jews believed ages before Christ, and which to this day all religions believe without exception, and for which belief the resurrection of Christ, however strange this may sound, is even unnecessary. What is the reason behind this odd bifurcation? The reason lies in our concept of death, or better, in a different concept of death as the separation of the soul from the body. All pre-Christian and extra-Christian religiosity teaches that this separation of the soul from the body should be regarded as not only natural, but also positive. That in this we should see a liberation of the soul from the body, which prevents the soul from being spiritual, heavenly, pure, and blessed. Since in human experience, evil, disease, suffering, and the passions arise from the body, the goal and meaning of religion and the religious life become naturally the liberation of the soul from this bodily prison, a liberation precisely in death which allows it to attain its fullness. But it must be most strongly emphasize that this concept of death is not Christian, and furthermore, it is incompatible with Christianity, manifestly contradictory. Christianity proclaims and confirms and teaches that this separation of the soul from the body, which we call death, is evil. It is not part of God's creation. It is that which entered the world, making it subject to itself, but opposed to God by violating his design, his desire for the world, for mankind, and for life. It is that which Christ came to destroy. But again, in order not to so much to understand, but rather to sense, to feel this Christian interpretation of death, we must begin by saying at least a few words about this design of God's, as much as it has been disclosed to us in the Holy Scriptures and revealed in its fullness in Christ and his teaching and his death and in his resurrection. This design may simply be concisely outlined thus. God created man with the body and soul, i.e. at once both spiritual and material. It is precisely this union of spirit, soul, and body that is called man in the Bible and in the gospel. Man, as created by God, is an animate body and an incarnate spirit, and for that reason, any separation of them, and not only the final separation in death, but even before death, any violation of that union is evil. It is a spiritual catastrophe. From this we receive our belief in the salvation of the world through the incarnate God, i.e. again, above all, our belief in his acceptance of flesh and body, not body-like, but a body in the fullest sense of the word, a body that needs food, that tires, and that suffers. Thus, that which in the Scriptures is called life, that life, which above all consists of the human body, animated by the Spirit, and of the Spirit made flesh, comes to an end at death in the separation of soul and body. No man does not disappear in death, for creation may not destroy that which God has called from nothingness into being. But man is plunged into death, into the darkness of lifelessness and debility. He, as the Apostle Paul says, is given over to destruction and ruin. Here, I once more like to repeat and emphasize that God did not create the world for the separation, dying, ruin, and corruption. And for this reason, the Christian gospel proclaims that, quote, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. The resurrection is the resurrection of the world in its original beauty and totality. It is the complete spiritualization of matter and the complete incarnation of the Spirit in God's creation. The world has been given to man as his life. And for this reason, according to our Christian Orthodox teaching, God will not annihilate it, but will transfigure it into, quote, a new heaven and a new earth, into man's spiritual body, into the temple of God's presence and God's glory in creation. Quote, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. And that destruction, that extermination of death began when the Son of God himself, in his immortal love for us, voluntarily descended into death and its darkness, filling its despair and horror with his light and love. And this is why we sing on Pascha not only, quote, Christ is risen from the dead, unquote, but also, quote, trampling down death by death, unquote. He alone rose from the dead, but he has destroyed our death, destroying its dominion, its despair, its finality. Christ does not promise us nirvana or some sort of misty life beyond the grave, but the resurrection of life, a new heaven and a new earth, the joy of the universal resurrection. Quote, the dead shall arise, and those in the tombs will sing of joy, unquote. Christ is risen, and life abides, life lives. That is the meaning. That is the unending joy of this truly central and fundamental confirmation of the symbol of faith. Quote, and the third day he rose again according to the Scriptures, i.e., in accordance with that knowledge of life, with that design for the world and humanity, for the soul and body, for the spirit and matter, for life and death, which has been revealed to us in the Holy Scriptures. This is the entire faith, the entire love, and the entire hope of Christianity. And this is why the Apostle Paul says, quote, if Christ is not risen, then your faith is in vain, unquote. Father Alexander Schmemann. So that concludes today's stream. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I wanted to note, too, that in the pursuit of not losing one's body in regards to the Aubrey de Greys or the Ray Kurzweils of the world, that are they losing their soul? The people who are infusing themselves with young people's blood, the use of adrenochrome, the foreskin being put on people's faces so they don't age. Is this actually an exchange that they're losing their soul in maintaining their physical body, which is still going to come to an end, while we are looking for the resurrection of both soul and body? Through Christ, we maintain the full image that we're made in. We're made in the image of eternity regarding our spiritual reality in the soul. We're made physically, and this is our body. And we as humans existing in space-time, we as mankind have the opportunity, not like the angels. Only mankind, we get to participate in theosis. We get to become gods by grace. This is the whole point of everything. This is the whole point of creation, and this is why God, Christ, the Logos, annihilated death. So nothing stands between you and the process of theosis. Nothing stands in the way of your soul and bodily resurrection. It's only you. You're the only thing that stands in the way. Your choices, the decisions that you make. So it's funny then to think about the people who we watched and listened to and the billionaire class who's using these technologies of life extension, banking on the technological singularity, the use of AI, that they are the ones that are losing their soul and maintaining their body temporarily. So anyways, that's going to conclude today's stream. Thank you all very, very much. Please smash that like if you guys could. Also, if anybody would like to show some love and throw in a super chat, please use the Streamlabs link. I'm going to get to the super chats right now. If you prefer to use YouTube, that is fine as well. I want to give a shout out to Dangerfield Henley. I missed your super chat when I got offline last stream, so I'm going to start there. Dangerfield Henley threw in a super chat last stream. Thank you so much, brother, and thank you to all the mods in the live chat. Shout out to Jethro. Shout out to Dangerfield Henley. Shout out to Alexandra. So, yes, Dangerfield Henley, super chat thrown in last time. I apologize, brother. I got offline and I didn't see it. He says, Westworld Season 2 has a terrifying scene that dramatizes the concept of the life in the well you mentioned. Gnostic Hollywood, transhumanism, confirm. Thanks, COTEL. Well, thank you so much, Dangerfield Henley, and thank you so much for helping out in the live chat and sharing links. I really, really appreciate it. First super chat from today comes from George's Journal. Well, thank you very much, George's Journal, for your super chat. He says, have you done videos on how to overcome the inner beta while not falling into degeneracy? You can respond later. I don't want to derail the stream. No, I have not done a stream on overcoming the inner beta. That might be a good one. Let that one marinate. Here, let me write that one down as well. Let me write that one down. Overcoming the inner beta. I know there's one that I want to do here in the near future on men's fashion. We're going to be talking about colors, how to dress, different types. I've had multiple requests on fashion. So I don't know when. I don't think it's going to be a very popular stream. I haven't really got into it, but I've had multiple people reach out about doing a fashion stream, how to put clothes together, how to tie a tie, all this different stuff. So may do that in the future. Yes. So thank you very much, George's Journal. I will do something on overcoming the inner beta. I think there's a lot of ways to overcome it without falling into degeneracy. Often the beta is what causes us to participate in the degeneracy. Because a man who can't be shaken from his goals, a man who cannot be shaken from his purpose, from his own disciplined morality and goals, that's an alpha. That's a man you can't mess with. He's a winner. So I'll do a stream on that, George's Journal. So thank you very much, brother, for the super chat. Orthodox Chloroquine, Orthodoxy Chloroquine. I love that name. Orthodoxy Chloroquine throws in a super chat and says, "Thanks, David. Love your content. God bless." Well, thank you, brother. Orthodoxy Chloroquine. I love your name. That's such a good handle. Orthodoxy Chloroquine. And George's Journal throws in another super chat. George's Journal says, "My overall impression of transhumanism is that it's a massive cope for boomers who can't face death." I hadn't thought about the whole boomer angle, because there's a lot of younger people. Again, the Peter Thiels, a lot of Gen Xers, a lot of millennials are into the singularity, right? The religion of the singularity. I mean, read Klaus Schwab. Everybody's seen the wardrobe he wears, where he looks like some wizard out of Star Trek. Well, again, look at his COVID-19, The Great Reset book, and you can't help but notice over and over again is that he's all about the technological singularity. He's all about this transformation of man from a biological to a sort of cyborg, a sort of syncretic entity mixed with machine. And this is what they're preparing with the stabby passports, with what's going on right now. This is all moving us towards this place, guys. And so beware, be alert, and make sure that, remember you guys aren't alone. If you're faced with a difficult decision in regards to work, where you work and getting stabbed, pray about it. Just as Nicki Minaj, you guys see what's going on with Nicki Minaj, shout out to Nicki Minaj. Who knew she was who we needed, and she's not backing down. It's hilarious to see her going back and forth on social media. And so I think the beast has that she can really make some change, not just, again, it's so ironic. I was thinking about a stream, actually, turning this Nicki Minaj thing into a stream called the Spirit of Jezebel, redemptions. I don't even know, but I was going to talk about like Cardi B and Nicki Minaj and all these different women and how they're wrapped up in the spirit of Jezebel. But Nicki, I mean, congratulations to her. Gosh, she has more balls than all of the GOP, right? Think about that, guys. Nicki Minaj has resisted the mandating of the stabbies more than any GOP, right? I mean, they give these lip service. You can talk about DeSantis and all this stuff, but generally speaking, I think again, if this can catch some fire and more celebrities maybe join her, this maybe could move the needle and wake some people up and cause people to question and all this stuff. So I loved her advice was to pray on it and don't be forced to put something in your body you're unsure about. So very, very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Yeah, that's a good title, George's Journal. The Beast versus the Base Jezebel. That's a pretty good title. I may do that next. That is such a great title. I am. That's probably going to be my next stream. The Beast versus the Base Jezebel. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Let me put this off to the side. The Beast versus the Base Jezebel. I love that. Oh, I love that. So God bless Nicki Minaj and everything she's doing. Next super chat comes from Infinite Microsecond. Infinite Microsecond throws in a super chat. And he says, Dapper Dave, thank you very much for your continued effort. It is much needed and much appreciated. Well, thank you so much, Infinite Microsecond, for being here. Your handle is new to me, so maybe this is your first time. I greatly appreciate you being here, contributing to the community. Thank you very much for the kind words. Dapper, always try to stay looking good. We're in a Friday casual, no vests, no ties, but always try to stay looking good. And I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for your support. I'll keep on bringing out the content. I'll keep on making the streams. I just hope you all continue to support me and come and listen. So thank you very much, Infinite Microsecond. It looks like last super chat comes from our good buddy, Truth Eli. And he says, really enjoyed the last stream. High culture, drugs, mysticism. Sent Bitcoin your way. Also check out Monero, Pirate Chain, and Dero, some privacy cryptos. As always, God bless. Oh man, yes, I need to get some Monero. I do not have any Monero. Again, the crypto markets are definitely looking better. I did not know you sent some Bitcoin, so I will definitely be looking at that. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you, Truth Eli. I greatly appreciate it. But yeah, thank you for Truth Eli for the super chat. Thank you for the Bitcoin. Thank you for watching the last stream. I'm really glad you enjoyed the high culture, drugs, and mysticism. And I definitely will take your advice. I've been meaning to get some Monero, but I haven't. What exchange are you on, by the way? If you don't feel like saying it right now, that's fine. You can email me. But yeah, I need to figure out which exchange to get on to get the Monero. But I've heard good things about Monero for sure. So anyways, so guys, it looks like that is the end of the super chat. Let me just scroll through here. I don't see myself highlighted for anything. Yeah, it looks like we are good. Guys, if you enjoy what we're trying to do over on this YouTube channel, please, I greatly, I'm not begging, but I am asking to please become a website member. Please become a website member over at davidpatrickcarey.com/register or churchoftheeternallogos.com/register. It's $5 a month. I can give you exclusive video content, and you help me out. I try to give you something in exchange, and this is just a great way to stay connected in case anything were to happen to the YouTube, that you could still support me. I can still have direct access to your email. If you guys don't even want to become members, you can go to the website and please join the mailing list. So again, if anything happens on YouTube, I can still have contacts with people. But thank you all very, very much. Please become a website member. And if anybody's looking to set up a one-on-one, you want to talk about any topics, you want to have my undivided attention for an hour, please do so with that link right there and sign up for a one-on-one. So thank you guys so much. I will be back probably Monday or Tuesday, maybe Sunday. I'm not sure, but probably Monday or Tuesday. Maybe Sunday afternoon. Maybe we'll do the Beast and the Base Jezebel Sunday afternoon. But I'll be back either Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, probably Monday. And we'll get back into it. So everybody have a wonderful weekend. Go to liturgy on Sunday. And I'll see you guys next time. As always, until next time, God bless.